humanist doing exactly what the humanists
you are not going to get an anti-ecumenist as head as any prominent in the ecumenical patriarch. Even among in the Moscow Patriarchate, among the so-called like old-style conservatives, like the Blagogan.ru people that are really Soviet Orthodox, is really how they think. I mean, they say stuff about Stalin was really part. I mean, literally, they had an article recently about how Stalin had returned to the church, and how he really died as part of the church and was.
Oh, I would love to see that, because people don't believe that the cult of Stalin is alive in the Moscow Patriarchate, and it is. Oh, it is.
Well, let me bring it up for you, if you want to look at it.
Yeah, no, I think everyone should see it, because this is something to remember, that when we talk about Sergianism, it's not that we talk about it like it's a former heresy. It's still there.
Well, you have to remember, Kirill did dedicate a statue to Sergius. So what I think is going to happen is many of these people will essentially, they will essentially conform to things like. Oh, here you go. Okay, putting it in the private chat, and then you can post it up there. I think this is it. It's the Google Translate version.
Okay. Well, it's an honorary thing to Patriarch Sergius there.
The title is called "To the 80th Anniversary of the Restoration by I.V. Stalin of the Patriarch in the Russian Church." Okay. So you can read through it.
Yeah, this is actually where this is kind of talking about where he was asked about Sergius, and basically he kind of went through this and created kind of this. It goes through.
There's also this legend about Metropolitan Elias of Mount Lebanon, who was receiving like visions, and he was directing Stalin about how to conduct the campaign against the Axis powers, and Stalin ordered these famous icons to be flown over Moscow, and I mean it's just invented storytelling. To me, it almost smacks of Sergianists in the 40s and 50s having to like make up stuff with the Soviets to justify this to their people. In some sense. Let me see.
Well, there's also the legend that they put of St. Matrona of Moscow secretly meeting Sergius that no one heard about until like 2003.
Yes.
No, meeting with Stalin, excuse me, not Sergius. But so this is where they resolved to defrock any clergy who went over to the side of the Nazis against the communists. So yeah, this is it's pretty sad, but pretty pathetic actually. But unfortunately, that is that's the current history now. That is.
I would if somebody's really interested in this, there's a numerous articles on this website. Some of them are actually not bad. Some of them are actually objectively all right. Stalin in the Church. Obviously others are objectively terrible.
Yeah. I'm putting a link for everyone to read the joyous article. But,
this may be the one I'm thinking about right here. I'm going to send you right now.
The key here is that one thing we definitely want to clearly establish here is that people do not understand that, and I've heard this from multiple people, including Metropolitan Valentine himself. The belief is not that Stalin restored the church. The belief is that Stalin created the Moscow Patriarchate, and the evidence appears to be here that he did. Except they think it's a good thing, and it's not. Okay, so I can't read the titles on this for some reason because this box.
There's the box over it.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the one maybe this might be the one. This might be the other one I sent you. I don't know if this is the same one. Yes. Look to the last link I sent you, Father Joseph.
Okay, hold on. Share
this is the one. Okay, good. Okay, now.
So this is about the oral.
I think it's worth going through this real quick, just for a few minutes.
Okay, no problem. One moment. Let me increase the size. Okay, so it's Stalin, and I assume that
it's called Stalin in the Church. Is the name of the article. That's Stalin and Sergius.
Is that Sergius or Alexei?
That might be Alexei the First.
Yeah, that's Alexei the First.
Okay, so
start reading. The top is that. This topic is difficult to study because there are very few verifiable sources.
As there, of course.
May as well start with some honesty here. Like, okay, basically, when speaking on this topic, we're forced to use indirect facts, or what is called oral tradition. Okay. Those who initially have a negative attitude towards Stalin call these myths about Stalin.
So we can already see where this is started.
We can see where they're going with this, which is like, we know that you guys, there might be some people who really don't believe this stuff, but here's what we're going to talk about.
Especially if your enemy is a Stalin.
Unfortunately, among the clergy and episcopate of the Russian Orthodox Church, there is a widespread negative attitude towards IV Stalin. This is how they teach in our seminaries. This is how many priests preach in churches. It is rare to meet a representative of the clergy who has not even a positive, but at least a neutral attitude towards the figure of Stalin. Allow me to just interrupt. That might be because of the whole killing 27 million Christians thing. The reason is clear. The peak of repressions against the clergy and episcopate of the Russian Church occurred in 1937 and 1938, when Stalin was at the head of the Soviet state. It is enough to look at the church calendar and see that almost every day the church remembers the new martyrs and confessors of Russia, most of whom completed their earthly journey in 1937 and 1938. Thus, in the minds of many representatives of the clergy, persecution against the church is firmly linked with the name of Stalin.
Well, how could you? It's
obviously... Why would you even think that?
It just happens to coincidence.
It's a coincidence, They just, died.
Continue.
First of all, we need to take account of the background of this problem. As is known, the February coup d'etat, which overthrew the sovereign Emperor Nicholas II, was either actively supported by the overwhelming majority of the clergy and episcopate of the Russian Church, or was met quite favorably.
Now, remember, there were two revolutions in 1970. There was a February Revolution, which was mainly led by liberal Democrats and Masons.
Yeah.
All right, and then there was you had the October Revolution, where the Bolsheviks just took over that government.
Right. Now, the provisional government, in turn, was at least neutral towards the church, and while the Februarists were in power, the church managed to convene a local council which eventually restored the Patriarchate. The Bolsheviks, who came to power in October 1917, officially proclaimed an atheistic ideology and a negative attitude towards the church, which immediately left an imprint on the relationship between the church and the new Soviet regime. His Holiness Patriarch Tikhon, at the beginning of 1918, declared anathema to those who shot religious processions and used other violence against the clergy and believers. During the Civil War, the church actively supported the White Guards, and this is understandable. Whites had a positive or neutral attitude towards the church. Under the White Generals, there was an institution of spiritual administration. Under Denikin, it was headed by Metropolitan Anton Krapovitsky of Kharkov. Under Kolchak, Bishop of Sylvester Olszewski. Under Wrangel, Archbishop of Simferopol Dmitry Abadhatsi. Naturally, in the eyes of Soviet authorities, the church was firmly associated with a force hostile to the Soviet state. Despite the fact that His Holiness Patriarch Tikhon, after the Civil War, recognized the legitimacy of Soviet power and announced his desire to build relations with the new government, the negative attitude of the Bolsheviks towards the church persisted. Yeah,
I've heard that contested about what there are documents that were forged by the Bolsheviks in the name of Patriarch Tikhon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This was also explained that by the fact that among the leaders of the Bolshevik governments, foreigners and people of other faiths
Jews
dominated. I mean, it says people of other faiths. Okay,
it's really Jews, is what
we know.
Okay, it wasn't schismatic. What old believer is running everything?
No, I think they're talking about the Living Church people. So yeah.
Okay, go ahead, continue.
Okay, so as well as schismatics who did not have respect for the church, the Soviet government tried to organize a revolution of the church by supporting the Living Church schism. The security officers persecuted active representatives of the episcopate and clergy. The situation began to improve after 1927, when the locum tenens of the patriarchal throne, Metropolitan Sergius, published a famous declaration, which, however,
the reading through this, it's like everything's matter of factly stated, and they're kind of forgetting the 1,000 facts in between.
Yeah. And they're
right.
just
legitimate locum tenens, for example. All right. Okay, continue.
Yeah, published it. Almost through the 30s, the repressive policy of the state towards the church continued. The militant atheist rage, and the unfinished third 5-year plan was declared a godless 5-year plan. Before the start of the war, there is almost no evidence of a change in Stalin's attitude towards the church. Although from the mid-30s he began to carefully pursue a policy of nationalizing Bolshevism in the spheres of culture and education.
National Bolshevism. Well, this is the mythology that Stalin was really sort of like a nationalist.
A Russian nationalist.
In Russian national, even though he was Georgian. He was a Russian nationalist. It's based off possibly a misunderstanding of his teaching of socialism in one country.
Well, this is it gets so much better now.
Okay.
Did Stalin know that the victims of the purges of 1937 to 1938 were innocent priests and bishops? I think I knew, although perhaps he did not know the scale and details of the persecution against the church.
Well, apparently, he was a very powerless figure. He was sort of
kind of clueless. But this is not a basis for calling Stalin Diocletian of the 20th century, as liberal church publicists and clergy often do. It's the liberals
the liberals, right?
It's the liberals, because a real conservative Russian knows that Stalin was a defender of the church.
Okay.
Diocletian nevertheless purposely persecuted the church, and Stalin's purges were, first of all, directed against the party and state elite, who opposed his course towards building socialism in one particular country, which implied some revision of the legacy of Marx and Lenin.
No, I think actually not. I think what it really entailed was that Stalin realized, like other Marxists at the time, that they had to establish Marxist power in the Soviet Union as a base to project the revolution into other places. Because their attempts back in 1919, 1920 to import the Marxist revolution into Poland have been stopped at the Vistula and in other areas. Remember, the communists tried to take over Bavaria, Germany, Austria, and they were defeated back in the early 20s. All right?
Yeah.
So this is really just a tactical restructuring of the Marxist plan. That's all it was.
Yeah, and so this is just awful.
Okay, continue. Let's
really have to. This is terrible.
Well, let's see what they say.
Okay. Well, however, we cannot claim that Stalin's attitude towards the church was the same throughout the years. Stalin's departure for the revolution, in a sense.
No, where are you at, Father?
I'm in here. Was a rebellion.
Wait. Go up.
What?
Go up. You missed. You skipped something.
I really don't feel like reading. It's just painful.
Okay, I'll go up to the part that says the personification. I'll start with that. Go up. Okay. All right. Good.
I don't want to talk about Trotsky.
Well, personification of this opposition to Stalin's course was the famous Bolshevik figure Trotsky. However, the repressions which were designed to cleanse the party and state apparatus of Trotsky's supporters could not be carried out under the slogan of the fight against the Trotskyists. It was too petty. So they were carried out under the slogan of the fight against the enemies of the people. And this feature of Stalin's repressive campaign was actively used by his opponents. Undoubtedly, in the repressions, one can trace a tendency towards stupidity, the meaninglessness of the process itself due to the prosecution of innocent people, representative of the church, military leaders, cultural figures, even party leaders of Stalin. This is one of the ways of fighting against Stalin by those people who carried out repressions or were ideological enemies of Stalin. So, in other words, the enemies of Stalin were killing the enemies of Stalin in order to make Stalin look bad.
And innocent people who just happened to be in the way.
He had no control. It is not surprising the main characters themselves, led by Yezhov, who carried the repressions, were soon themselves repressed. Stalin was in rather difficult conditions and apparently could not do anything to prevent. He could not do anything.
He was powerless. Stalin was powerless.
Yeah. This is indirectly evidenced by the phrase he said to Metropolitan Sergius from oral tradition. Not the good oral tradition like in the church. Then the church received a lot of what it wanted, even more than the Metropolitan expected. But Stalin told the Metropolitan, quote, "This is all for now, Vladika, that I can do for you." This phrase clearly shows the limitations of Stalin's capabilities. No, it doesn't. It is no coincidence.
He was like, this sorry patriarch.
Now, why was Stalin so incapable? Well, it says it's no coincidence that the meetings with the Metropolitans itself took place in the presence of other members of the Bolshevik leadership, so that Stalin could not be suspected of some kind of sympathy for Orthodoxy, which was a crime for a Soviet party leader. What they're essentially saying is Stalin was sympathetic to the church, that he was secretly Orthodox, but he was scared of other people in the Soviet government would overthrow him if
those
they found out.
Dang communists.
Yeah.
Poor Stalin.
Okay, so however, we cannot claim that Stalin's attitude toward the... Well, someone can continue reading this.
However, we cannot claim that Stalin's attitude towards the church, I'm not going to read it in Russian, was the same throughout the years. Stalin's departure for the revolution, in a certain sense, was his rebellion against the church and God. We must understand that having come to power, Stalin gradually changed his views on communism, abandoning some of the dogmas of the communist creed, and at the same time he returned to God.
Okay, all right.
This was evidenced by all the pictures of him in church.
Yes, exactly. I would also like to see he return. I mean, are there speeches from? Can we track speeches from 1942 to when did he die? 1953, 55.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there speeches where he mentions atheism, secularism? I'm vaguely going to say there probably are.
Yeah.
So let's say, even for the sake of argument, which is a great admission, that Stalin had secretly by 44, like, well, maybe I was wrong. If he did do that, which I don't believe he did at all.
No.
But yet he did not publicly affirm his orthodoxy, then it'd still be apostasy.
Yeah.
All right, that's the church. That's not how the church operates. Remember, our Lord said, "Those who do not confess me before men, I will not confess before my Father in heaven." All right. So this idea that he was secretly an Orthodox Christian during this time, what's worse, to be secretly an Orthodox Christian but then still allow this massive persecution against the church? I mean, that's terrible.
And it says, I can't.
And this, of course, Patriarch Alexei says that someone asked him how could he serve a memorial service in 1953 for Stalin, who was a atheist, and the Patriarch told someone, "I did not serve a memorial service for an atheist." All right, so that's the justification for people today doing panagidas for Stalin. It says, in fact, they say, obviously, this is jumping to conclusions, obviously Alexei knew more than he could say. We are probably talking about the fact that Stalin returned to the church. This means that he confessed and received communion, which, of course, there is no evidence for.
Right.
It's his whole supposition that the Patriarch served a memorial service, therefore this means that. Well, it could also mean the Patriarch Alexei didn't really have much. He was scared of getting in trouble with the communist government. So he just said, "Oh, I'm going to do a memorial service for Stalin to show patriotism."
Yeah, because they still had to, show respect for the cult of Stalin. This is where I was referring to. Liberal church leaders question many of the oral testimonies. For example, the fact of Stalin's meeting with Matrona of Moscow, the one that I mentioned, probably didn't happen. But I guess I've never been called a liberal before on this. I'm kind of feeling.
On Blagagon.ru, if you don't agree with Sergius, you're a liberal. That's their position. I've noticed it over the years.
Well.
I mean, obviously it's crazy. I mean,
now the communists aren't liberals, but we're liberals. I mean,
well, the communists were oftentimes not very liberal. Well, liberals historically, when they have power and authority, are not kind to their enemies.
Yeah.
You can look at things like Bartholomew. I mean, he. And others. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But in any case, so this mentions the letter of Metropolitan Elijah of the Lebanese mountains, in which he conveyed.
And there's no evidence of. Okay, so anyway, someone can read through this if they want to.
I put a link in the chat.
Now I think this comes from. Go ahead.
Well, Theodore asks, how do MP supporters in Russia explain UConn's 362 from St. Tikhon? They don't. That's basically what it comes down to. They don't even want to think about it. Is that why we sometimes see icons of Stalin? Yes, that is exactly why. Because
there's the famous one of the Stalin behind the MP Metron of Belgorod. Yeah. I mean, you do have MP people. They do mention it. And
they almost put it in the military cathedral, but it caused such a massive protest that Putin was like, "No, don't do it."
Well, I mean, we can also have to be honest here. We want to be honest, obviously, but you do have. He does admit that they do have a lot of people in the MP who aren't comfortable with the cultus of Stalin.
Right, but they're all liberals.
Yeah, they're all exactly. So if you oppose it, you're a liberal.
If we're not,
Blagagon.ru's editorial staff has extremely anti Solzhenitsyn views. For example, they believe he was a traitor to Russia.
Really?
Oh yeah, he should have been executed. That because their view is the Soviet state was essentially Russia. There's no difference, and that the collapse of the Soviet Union was bad. Now, it's not like saying, well, the Soviet Union should have just been turned back into the Russian Empire, because you can argue the Soviet Union was the Russian Empire that had taken over by Marxists and then destroyed.
Yeah.
All right. In terms of territorial integrity, I suppose you can say that. All right.